In the heart of the savanna, nestled between the ancient baobab trees and the winding embrace of the great river Zambezi, lay the village of Umoja. Umoja, meaning unity in the ancient tongue, was once a place of vibrant life, where the rhythm of the drums echoed the heartbeat of the community. The houses, crafted from mud and thatch, stood like sentinels, guarding the secrets of generations. Here, children played under the watchful eyes of their elders, their laughter mingling with the songs of the weaver birds. The air was thick with the aroma of roasting maize and the sweet scent of mangoes ripened by the African sun. For decades, Umoja thrived under the wise rule of King Jabari, a man whose heart was as vast as the savanna itself. He was known for his fairness, his courage, and his unwavering dedication to his people. He mediated disputes with patience, led his warriors with bravery, and ensured that every member of the village had enough to eat. King Jabari was more than just a ruler. He was the father of Umoja, the guardian of their traditions, and the embodiment of their hopes and dreams. Life in Umoja was simple, yet rich in culture and community. The villagers spent their days farming the fertile lands, fishing in the Zambezi, and crafting intricate works of art. Their nights were filled with storytelling around crackling fires, where tales of their ancestors and the spirits of the land were passed down from one generation to the next. There was a deep sense of belonging, a shared understanding that they were all interconnected, bound together by the threads of kinship and mutual respect. But even in paradise, the seeds of discontent can take root. Whispers of a different life, a life of greater ease and luxury, began to creep into the hearts of some villagers. The allure of foreign goods, brought by merchants from distant lands, started to erode the traditional values of Umoja. The spirit of unity, once so strong, began to crumble under the weight of envy and greed. And so, the stage was set for a betrayal that would forever stain the history of Umoja. The arrival of the foreign merchants was initially met with curiosity and excitement. They came bearing gifts of shimmering fabrics, gleaming metal tools, and strange, intoxicating drinks. Their words were smooth and persuasive, painting a picture of a world where wealth flowed freely and life was filled with endless pleasures. They spoke of cities paved with gold, of houses that touched the sky, and of people who lived like gods. The villagers of Umoja, who had known only the simple joys of their traditional life, were captivated by these tales of opulence. The merchants set up their stalls in the village square, transforming it into a bustling marketplace filled with exotic sights and sounds. They traded their wares for the precious resources of Umoja, ivory, gold, and the bountiful harvest of the land. At first, the trade seemed beneficial. The villagers acquired new tools that made their work easier and beautiful fabrics that adorned their bodies with elegance. But as the merchants gained influence, they began to exploit the villagers' desires, offering them fleeting moments of pleasure in exchange for their long-term prosperity. They encouraged the villagers to abandon their traditional crafts and focus solely on producing goods for trade, disrupting the delicate balance of their economy. They whispered doubts about King Jabari's leadership, suggesting that he was holding them back from achieving their full potential. The seeds of discord were sown, and the villagers began to question the wisdom of their king. The merchants, with their honeyed words and tempting offers, had become the serpents in Umoja's Garden of Eden, poisoning the hearts of the people with greed and envy. The whispers of discontent grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the village. No longer were the villagers content with the simple life they had always known. They began to covet the wealth and luxury that the merchants flaunted before them. They grumbled about the king's taxes, which they now saw as an obstacle to their own enrichment. They complained about the traditional customs, which they deemed outdated and restrictive. The village elders, who had always been respected for their wisdom and experience, found themselves increasingly ignored. Their voices, once revered, were now drowned out by the clamor of discontent. Even close friends and family members began to turn against each other, suspicious of each other's motives, and resentful of each other's possessions. The spirit of unity, which had once been the bedrock of Umoja's strength, was shattered into a million pieces. King Jabari, sensing the growing unrest, tried to reason with his people. He reminded them of the values that had sustained them for generations: the importance of community, the respect for tradition, and the gratitude for the blessings of the land. He warned them of the dangers of greed and the illusion of quick riches. But his words fell on deaf ears. The villagers were too blinded by their desires to see the truth. They accused him of being out of touch, of clinging to the past, and of standing in the way of their progress. The king's heart ached with sadness as he watched his beloved village crumble from within. Under the cloak of darkness, a group of influential villagers gathered in secret. Among them were Chief Baraka, a powerful and ambitious leader who had long coveted the king's throne. Mama Zola, a wealthy trader who had grown rich from the merchants' deals, and Askari, the captain of the king's guard, whose loyalty had been bought with promises of greater power. These individuals, driven by their own selfish desires, began to plot against King Jabari. They met in the shadows, their voices hushed, their eyes gleaming with greed. They discussed ways to overthrow the king, to seize his power, and to plunder the wealth of Umoja for themselves. At first, they considered assassinating King Jabari. But they feared the repercussions of such a blatant act of treachery. They knew that the villagers, despite their discontent, still held a deep respect for their king. An open rebellion would likely fail. Mama Zola, with her cunning mind, proposed a different plan. She suggested that they sell King Jabari to the foreign merchants. She argued that the merchants would pay a hefty price for the king, whom they saw as an obstacle to their continued exploitation of Umoja. The merchants, she reasoned, would take the king far away, where he could no longer interfere with their business. And in his absence, the conspirators could seize control of the village. The idea was shocking, even to those who had already embraced treachery. But the allure of wealth and power was too strong to resist. After much deliberation, they agreed to Mama Zola's plan. They would betray their king, their father, and their protector, all for the sake of their own selfish desires. The conspirators approached the merchants with their treacherous proposal. At first, the merchants were skeptical. They could not believe that the villagers would be willing to sell their own king. They questioned the conspirators' motives, suspecting a trap. But the conspirators, with their eloquent lies and their desperate pleas, convinced the merchants of their sincerity. They offered them proof of their loyalty, revealing secret information about the village's defenses and resources. They swore that they would deliver King Jabari into their hands without resistance. The merchants, seeing an opportunity to secure their control over Umoja, agreed to the deal. They offered the conspirators a vast sum of gold, enough to make them the wealthiest people in the village. They promised them positions of power and influence, ensuring that they would rule Umoja in the merchants' interests. The price of a king was set. It was a price that would forever haunt the village of Umoja. As the conspirators counted their ill-gotten gains, they felt a pang of guilt. They knew that they were committing a terrible act of betrayal. They knew that they were sacrificing their king, their village, and their own souls for the sake of greed. But the temptation of wealth and power was too strong to resist. They silenced their consciences and convinced themselves that they were doing what was best for Umoja. They told themselves that the king was old and out of touch, that he was holding them back from a brighter future. They justified their actions with lies and rationalizations, desperately trying to escape the weight of their own treachery. The conspirators chose a night of the full moon to execute their plan. They knew that King Jabari would be alone in his chambers, preparing for the annual harvest festival. Askari, the captain of the king's guard, used his position to betray his trust. He led a group of armed men into the king's chambers, surprising King Jabari in his sleep. The king, though old, was still a powerful warrior. He fought bravely, defending himself against the conspirators' attack. But he was outnumbered and outmatched. Askari, with a heavy heart but a determined hand, struck the king with a poisoned dart, rendering him unconscious. The conspirators bound King Jabari and carried him away from the palace, through the sleeping village, to a secret rendezvous point on the banks of the Zambezi. The villagers, unaware of the treachery that was unfolding, slept peacefully in their beds. They trusted their king, their leaders, and their neighbors. They could not imagine that such a betrayal was even possible. As the conspirators dragged King Jabari through the darkness, they felt the eyes of the ancestors upon them. They heard the whispers of the spirits in the wind, condemning their actions. But they pressed on, driven by their greed and their ambition. They had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. At the rendezvous point, the merchants waited with bated breath. They had brought with them a large wagon, covered in heavy tarpaulins, to transport King Jabari to their distant land. The conspirators handed over the unconscious king to the merchants, collecting the final payment of gold. As they watched the merchants load King Jabari onto the wagon, they felt a wave of regret wash over them. They realized the enormity of what they had done. They had sold their king, their protector, their father, to strangers who would exploit him for their own gain. But it was too late to turn back. The deal was done. The merchants thanked the conspirators for their cooperation and promised them a prosperous future. They climbed onto the wagon and whipped the horses, setting off on their journey into the unknown. As the wagon rumbled away, the conspirators stood in silence, watching it disappear into the darkness. They had achieved their goal. They had seized power and wealth. But they had also lost something far more precious: their honor, their integrity, and their souls. The Zambezi River flowed silently by, bearing witness to their treachery. The next morning, the villagers awoke to a chilling discovery. King Jabari was gone. The palace was deserted, the guards were missing, and a sense of dread hung heavy in the air. At first, the villagers assumed that the king had gone on a journey. But as the day wore on, and he did not return, their suspicions began to grow. They searched the village, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him. Finally, some of the more observant villagers noticed tracks leading from the palace to the banks of the Zambezi. They followed the tracks and discovered the secret rendezvous point, where they found evidence of a struggle and the remnants of the merchants' camp. The truth dawned upon them with devastating clarity. Their king had been betrayed. He had been captured and sold to the foreign merchants. A wave of anger and disbelief swept through the village. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces contorted with grief and outrage. They demanded answers, demanding to know who had committed this heinous act of treachery. The conspirators, who had been trying to blend into the crowd, found themselves exposed. Their guilt was written all over their faces. The villagers turned on them, accusing them of betraying their king and their community. Faced with the villagers' wrath, the conspirators crumbled. Chief Baraka, Mama Zola, and Askari confessed to their crimes, revealing the details of their treacherous plot. They admitted that they had been motivated by greed and ambition, that they had been blinded by the merchants' promises of wealth and power. They pleaded for forgiveness, but their words rang hollow. The villagers were horrified by their betrayal. They could not believe that their own leaders, their own neighbors, could be capable of such wickedness. A mob formed, intent on punishing the conspirators for their crimes. But the village elders intervened, reminding the villagers of the importance of justice and restraint. They insisted that the conspirators be brought before the village council to be judged fairly. The conspirators were taken into custody, their fate hanging in the balance. The village of Umoja was in turmoil, torn apart by grief, anger, and betrayal. The unity that had once defined them was shattered, replaced by suspicion and resentment. The future of Umoja hung precariously in the balance. The trial of the conspirators was a solemn and agonizing affair. The entire village gathered in the square, their faces etched with sorrow and anger. The village elders, their voices trembling with emotion, presided over the proceedings. The evidence against the conspirators was overwhelming. Witnesses testified to their secret meetings, their suspicious activities, and their lavish spending. The merchants' gold, hidden in their homes, was presented as irrefutable proof of their guilt. The conspirators offered no defense. They knew that they were guilty, and they knew that they deserved to be punished. They could only beg for mercy, hoping that the villagers would spare their lives. The village elders listened patiently to the evidence and the pleas. They weighed the gravity of the conspirators' crimes against the values of justice and compassion. They debated long into the night, their voices echoing through the silent village. Finally, they reached a verdict. The conspirators were found guilty of treason, betrayal, and murder. Their punishment was severe but just. They were banished from the village, never to return. Their property was confiscated and distributed among the villagers who had suffered the most from their treachery. The elders hoped that this act of justice would begin to heal the wounds that had been inflicted upon Umoja. The banishment of the conspirators brought a temporary sense of relief to the village of Umoja. But the damage had been done. The village was forever scarred by the betrayal of its leaders. The spirit of unity, once so strong, was difficult to rekindle. The villagers struggled to trust each other, suspicious of hidden motives and lingering resentments. The economy of Umoja also suffered. The merchants, having achieved their goal of removing King Jabari, exploited the villagers mercilessly. They drove down the prices of their goods, forcing them to work harder for less. They introduced new vices, such as alcohol and gambling, that further weakened the community. The villagers realized that they had made a terrible mistake. They had sacrificed their king, their community, and their prosperity for the sake of fleeting riches. They longed for the days when King Jabari ruled with wisdom and fairness. They regretted their greed, their envy, and their lack of trust. But it was too late. Their king was gone, and their village was broken. A young woman named Imani, the daughter of one of the village elders, could not bear to see her village suffer any longer. She remembered the stories of King Jabari's kindness and wisdom, and she knew that she had to do something to bring him back. Imani decided to embark on a perilous journey to find King Jabari and rescue him from the clutches of the merchants. She knew that the journey would be long and dangerous, but she was determined to succeed. She packed a small bag with food, water, and a few essential tools. She bid farewell to her family and friends, promising them that she would not return until she had rescued their king. With a heavy heart but a resolute spirit, Imani set off on her journey, following the tracks of the merchant's wagon. She walked for days, crossing vast stretches of savanna, scaling towering mountains, and navigating treacherous rivers. She faced many dangers along the way, including wild animals, hostile tribes, and treacherous terrain. But she never gave up hope. She was driven by her love for her village and her loyalty to her king. Imani's journey led her into the heart of the Great Kalahari Desert, a vast and unforgiving expanse of sand and sun. The heat was unbearable, the water scarce, and the landscape monotonous. Imani's strength was tested to its limits. She stumbled through the burning sand, her throat parched, her skin blistered, her spirit weary. She saw mirages in the distance, shimmering illusions of water and shade that taunted her with false hope. She battled despair, reminding herself of the importance of her mission and the suffering of her village. One day, as she lay exhausted beneath the scorching sun, she encountered an old nomad, a wise and weathered traveler who had spent his entire life wandering the desert. The nomad shared his water with Imani and listened to her story. He was moved by her courage and her determination. He told her that he had seen the merchant's wagon pass through the desert many days ago. He warned her that they were heading towards a distant city, a place of great wealth and corruption, where King Jabari would likely be held captive. The nomad gave Imani directions to the city and offered her a ride on his camel. He knew that she could not survive the desert alone. Imani gratefully accepted his help. Together, they crossed the remaining stretch of the desert, braving the heat, the sandstorms, and the loneliness. The nomad taught Imani valuable lessons about survival, about the resilience of the human spirit, and about the importance of kindness and compassion. After weeks of travel, Imani and the nomad finally reached the City of Gold, a sprawling metropolis of towering buildings, bustling marketplaces, and opulent palaces. The city was a stark contrast to the simple village of Umoja. It was a place of great wealth and opportunity, but also of great poverty and corruption. Imani was overwhelmed by the sights and sounds of the city. She had never seen so many people, so many goods, or so much extravagance. But she did not allow herself to be distracted. She focused on her mission, determined to find King Jabari. The nomad helped Imani navigate the city, guiding her through the labyrinthine streets and the crowded marketplaces. He told her that the merchants were known for their cruelty and their greed. They were powerful and influential, and they would not hesitate to use violence to protect their interests. He warned her to be careful, to trust no one, and to rely on her own instincts. Imani searched for King Jabari for days, asking questions, following leads, and venturing into the city's darkest corners. She faced many setbacks and disappointments, but she never gave up hope. She knew that her king was out there, and she was determined to find him. Finally, Imani received a credible lead. She learned that a foreign king was being held captive in a fortress on the outskirts of the city. The fortress was heavily guarded, but Imani was determined to infiltrate it. She sought the help of a group of disgruntled slaves who worked in the fortress. They had heard stories of King Jabari's kindness and fairness, and they were willing to risk their lives to help Imani rescue him. The slaves provided Imani with a secret passage into the fortress. They told her that King Jabari was being held in a dungeon deep beneath the ground. Imani, armed with her courage and her determination, entered the fortress under the cover of darkness. She navigated the maze-like corridors, avoiding the guards and the watchful eyes of the merchants. She reached the dungeon and found King Jabari chained to a wall, weak and emaciated. The king was overjoyed to see Imani. He had given up hope of ever returning to his village. He thanked Imani for her loyalty and her bravery. Imani freed King Jabari from his chains. Together, they made their way back through the fortress, relying on the slaves to guide them. They faced many close calls, but they managed to evade the guards and escape the fortress. Imani and King Jabari emerged from the fortress under the cover of darkness, reunited and determined to return to Umoja. The slaves who had helped them escape bid them farewell, promising to spread the word of their heroic deed. Imani and King Jabari embarked on their long journey home, retracing the steps that Imani had taken months before. They faced many challenges along the way, including hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. But they were sustained by their hope for the future and their love for their village. They traveled through the desert, across the mountains, and along the rivers, relying on their wit, their strength, and their resilience. They encountered many people along the way, some who were kind and helpful, others who were hostile and suspicious. But they never lost sight of their goal, to return King Jabari to his rightful place as the leader of Umoja. After months of travel, Imani and King Jabari finally reached the outskirts of Umoja. They approached the village cautiously, unsure of how they would be received. They had heard rumors that the merchants had tightened their grip on the village, and that the villagers were living in fear. As they entered the village, they were met with stunned silence. The villagers could not believe their eyes. They had thought that King Jabari was gone forever. They rushed to greet him, showering him with hugs, kisses, and tears of joy. The news of King Jabari's return spread like wildfire through the village. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces beaming with happiness. They celebrated the return of their king with singing, dancing, and feasting. King Jabari was deeply moved by the villagers' loyalty and affection. He promised them that he would restore Umoja to its former glory. With King Jabari back in power, the villagers turned their attention to the merchants. They had tolerated their exploitation for too long. They were determined to reclaim their village and their resources. King Jabari led the villagers in a revolt against the merchants. They stormed the merchants' compounds, seizing their goods, and driving them out of the village. The merchants, caught off guard, were easily defeated. They fled Umoja, vowing to return, but they never did. With the merchants gone, King Jabari set about restoring Umoja to its former state of unity and prosperity. He forgave the villagers who had betrayed him, recognizing that they had been misled by greed and envy. He appointed new leaders, individuals who were known for their wisdom, their fairness, and their dedication to the community. He encouraged the villagers to return to their traditional ways, to value community over individual gain, and to respect the wisdom of their elders. Umoja slowly began to heal. The villagers worked together to rebuild their homes, their farms, and their relationships. They rediscovered the importance of unity, the value of tradition, and the power of forgiveness. King Jabari ruled with wisdom and compassion, guiding his people towards a brighter future. He learned from his experience, recognizing the dangers of greed and the importance of vigilance. He established new laws to protect the village from exploitation and to ensure that all members of the community had enough to eat. He encouraged education so that the villagers could learn from the past and prepare for the future. Umoja thrived once again, becoming a beacon of hope and inspiration for other villages in the region. The story of the village that sold its king became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of greed and the importance of loyalty. And so, the village of Umoja learned a valuable lesson. They learned that wealth and power are fleeting, but that unity and integrity are enduring. They learned that true happiness comes not from material possessions, but from strong relationships and a shared sense of purpose. They learned that a good leader is not one who seeks to enrich himself, but one who seeks to serve his people. The story of Umoja is a reminder to us all that we must be vigilant against the forces of greed and division, and that we must always strive to uphold the values of unity, justice, and compassion. The spirit of Umoja lives on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of hope. What did you think of the tale of Umoja? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more African folk tales, and tap the notification bell to be alerted when we upload a new video. Until next time, farewell, and may the spirit of Umoja guide your way.